Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a review on the ASUS ROG Ally X. I'm so excited for today. Let's start this one off right. This is not the ASUS ROG Ally 2. It is definitely not a sequel to the original Ally. It is a revision in the same way that the Steam Deck OLED was a revision of the Steam Deck LCD. It's more in line with that, so don't go in here expecting complete big changes. Although I would highly argue, the same way that I did with the Steam Deck OLED, that the changes make it a completely different handheld. Same exact scenario. There is a lot that we have to cover today, so let's go through all of the major changes and what you need to know about this new Ally X. First up, the biggest change is that ASUS doubled the battery size from 40 watts that was in the original Ally to 80 watts. And a lot of people theorized that it would just be double the battery life. And I did a lot of testing on this, and it ended up being a case where it's not just that scenario. It ended up being sometimes more than double. Last week was the release of retro achievements for GameCube, and so naturally I spent a lot of time on the Ally X playing them. Based off of my experience with my performance mode set to turbo for worst case scenarios, and the emulator set to 1080p, the minimum battery life that I saw was 6 hours. But it was closer to 6.5. This is based off of a TDP that hovers around 11 watts to 20 watts, depending on the game, the scene, and so on. But 6 hours for GameCube is fantastic. For comparison, the original Ally tops out at around 3 hours. It's a massive difference. But of course, I did a whole bunch more testing, so let's talk about all of that. Using the 25 watt turbo mode preset, both devices running Cyberpunk, and the original Ally died after 61 minutes, which is, not great. However, the Ally X kept on going and finally died after 151 minutes, which is right at 2.5 hours. That is a huge difference already, and not just double battery, that is 2.5 times. Naturally, I continued my testing, and next up was the built-in performance modes for both devices. The original Ally's performance mode is 15 watt, while the Ally X's performance mode is 17 watt. Rather than match the two, I decided to just test based off of the built-in modes, meaning that if you did want to match the Ally X to the original Ally's 15 watt, it would be even better than the results I see. But I saw a battery life of 130 minutes on the original Ally, which is just past 2 hours, while the Ally X was 275 minutes, or 4.5 hours. Then we have silent mode testing, and once again, different on both. The original Ally's silent mode is 10 watt, and the Ally X's is 13 watt. The original Ally lasted 213 minutes, or 3.5 hours. While the Ally X was 450 minutes, which is 7.5 hours. This is where a lot of emulation lives, indie games, and so on. So the main takeaway here from me is that this is either double or better the original Ally when it comes to battery life, which is fantastic right away, but it also means we actually have a competitor to the Steam Deck for battery life on a Windows-based handheld finally. And all it took was doubling the battery size, but doesn't matter how we got there. Still is a competitor. For me, this is a complete win for consumers as a whole and for anybody like myself that prefers Windows-based handhelds. We now have an option that fits what we want in a handheld, and this is perfect. This changes things completely from the original Ally, where I felt like as soon as I unplugged it from the charger, the battery was at 50% already. It's a bit of an exaggeration, I know, but low battery anxiety is a real thing. It's constant with the original Ally, but with the X, it's non-existent. Instantly changes the device from one that you basically have to make sure that there's a plug or a battery bank near you, to a portable handheld that you don't have to worry about that as much anymore. That alone is worth the price of admission for me of having this actually be a handheld again. Along with the battery changes, and we talked about it during the tests, ASUS changed how the performance modes work. Silent mode is now 13 watt, up from the previous 10 watt on the original Ally. Performance mode is now 17 watt, up from the previous 15 watt, and turbo remains the same at 25 watt in battery mode and 30 watt when you're plugged in. These are the built-in modes, of course, and I much prefer the 17 watt performance mode now, as I was previously using the 18 watt profile on my Ally that I custom made for myself. I just find that 17 or 18 watts is better for when you're out on the go. It's a perfect combination of battery and performance. However, the best part of all of this is thanks to the upgraded cooling in the device, the fan noise is actually a bit lower than the original Ally when you're in turbo mode, and it's actually cooler as well. Overall, it basically means that because the Ally X is using a higher TDP performance mode and silent mode, you're not changing anything on the fan noise or thermals or anything like that. It is basically how it would have ran on the Ally, except on the Ally X at a higher TDP, which is, you could call it a performance boost, but it's kind of a cooling boost. So that brings us to the next biggest change, which was the RAM. And the original Ally had 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 6400 RAM, and now the Ally X has 24 gigabytes of LPDDR5X 7500 RAM. For those that get bored by specs like I do, it basically just means we have more RAM and faster RAM in the Ally X, which theoretically should lead to better performance, as well as better lows and 1% lows and all of that. Now, coming into this, I kind of had my doubts about this. I didn't really think that RAM changes would make much of a difference at all. And then I did some tests. I ran some benchmarks comparing the OG Ally to the Ally X. In TimeSpy, the Ally X comes out ahead as expected, but weirdly had a lower CPU score. Not sure why the CPU score is lower, it would only be uneducated guesses on my part. Also ran some tests in Geekbench 6. And the Ally X comes out ahead for single and multi-core scores as expected. And it's the same story for both OpenCL and Vulkan scores. But that's all boring benchmarks, and I'm not sure how many of you care about that part. Let's talk about actual games. Here is Cyberpunk 2077 on the Ally compared to the Ally X. And we are using the in-game presets for low, medium, and high here. No other changes besides resolution, and we're plugged in for 30 watt turbo. I'm actually going to use my second test numbers for the X. The first test that I did saw larger numbers, and I'm going to leave it on screen right now for you to check it out. But given that the second test was lower, I'm going to use them instead. In my second test, and what you see on screen now, that is a massive difference, specifically for 720p resolution. Now, I would love to sit here and say that every single game has these sorts of increases, but that's not the case. Let's look at Forza Horizon 5. This is a much closer and more expected 9% average increase across the board, and not massive gains over the original Ally, but it is still gains nonetheless. I have seen people spend so much more money for 10% upgrade than what this costs. Assassin's Creed Origins is similar. A smaller 6% increase on average across the board, and it's more in line with what I think a lot of people expected. Lastly, we have Horizon Zero Dawn. On the 720p side, it's a 16% increase on average, with once again, the 720p resolution showing the biggest increases. Lots of options here for what you might want to play at on the Ally X. Then, on the 1080p side, it's an 11% increase on average across the board. So, as usual, the higher the resolution, the lower the increase. But I'm not going to say no to better performance across the board. So, what does all of this mean, these boring charts and performance graphs? Well, first, there is no regressions that I could find. No matter what game that I played or that I tried, I didn't see worse performance on the Ally X than the original Ally. And that would have been a disaster if that was the case. Second, depending on the game, you could see massive performance boosts like the case of Cyberpunk, and also depending on the resolution and the presets that you play at, like 720p low, for example. It gets the highest boosts, which is expected, but across the board, it's just better than the original Ally. This isn't a flat increase across the board for every single game, though, but it is a net benefit nonetheless. Some games might have a lot smaller of an increase over others. Honestly, I could do an entire video on just this, looking at 1% lows and all of that sort of thing, but really there is no point. I would basically peg this at a 10% upgrade in performance, generally, and you can take that to the bank. But no matter which way you look at it, you're going to have a better and smoother experience playing games on the Ally X. Is it always going to be noticeable? No. Would I buy the Ally X for a performance upgrade? No. But when you combine that with all of the other upgrades, it's a welcome addition. Let's switch things up and we'll do an actual tour of the device and what's changed on the rest of it, because I think that's what seals the deal for me, is battery is great, performance is great, but they still went further than that and they upgraded other things that actually matter. From an outside perspective, we have a second USB-C port, and it is actually USB4 with a 40 GB per second speed allowance. This allows you to connect any eGPU adapter, like the ADT UT3G that I have right here, as opposed to the previous Ally, which was using ASUS's proprietary eGPU solution. Plus, it's a second USB-C port, and who is going to say no to that? Starting off with the ergonomic differences, and the Ally X is substantially more comfortable than the Ally. It is crazy how different it feels. The edges are more contoured to your palm and not just squared out, and it just feels so much better. I brought it up earlier, but the day that Retro Achievements for GameCube came out, I had a massive binge session with the Ally X for hours, and it's actually how I did my battery test for GameCube. I played it from 100% till it died in one sitting. Not once did I feel uncomfortable, heavy, cramping, or anything like that, and that was around 6.5 hours. Hands felt great, in the right spots, they're fantastic grips on the back, and nothing slipped out or moved or anything. It felt natural. I've had multiple days like that since then, and my thoughts haven't changed at all. It is an absolute night and day difference over the original Ally for comfort and ergonomics. I've done reviews now on a lot of different x86 handhelds. The Steam Decks, the GPDs, Lenovo Legion Go, MSI Claw, Ioneos, and so on. To this day, the Steam Deck OLED has always been my top pick for comfort. It just feels good. Nothing has really come close, and it's always kind of been the top device to compare to others when it comes to comfort. The Ally X, for me, is now tied. It is heavier, but it's beautifully designed for comfort, and besides the battery changes, might be my favorite upgrade that they've done. This is an extremely comfortable device, and thanks to the grippy texture on the back, it just doesn't move from your hands. Now, the color between the two devices is obviously different, and they did it this way to separate between the Ally and the Ally X. I do kind of miss the white of the Ally. It gave it a nice, distinct look compared to other devices, but I can understand why they changed it to black here. Honestly, I kind of just wish that they had more color options. I would love a blue. If you could give me a blue, I would be so happy. The ABXY buttons are different on both. They sit slightly higher than the original Ally, and they're a bit more tactile in usage. I was a big fan of the original Ally's buttons, and these are just better, but nothing major. It's a positive change that likely doesn't affect most people, but it's a welcome one, once again. Now, the joysticks are not Hall effect sticks, which might bum out some people, but Hall effect doesn't naturally mean good, just means that they're measuring using magnets. I've seen a lot of bad Hall effect sticks. Looking at you, Ambernick. But the joysticks here feel massively different compared to the original. On the original, a common complaint was that they were way too loose. I personally didn't have that complaint. I liked them a lot. These are way different. There is resistance here, but not too much. And the tops are different as well. These are a lot grippier than the original is, and I think if your complaint was the original being too loose, these are for you. However, it does take some time getting used to for navigating Windows again. I really like the original's looseness for that, and these new sticks are a lot stiffer, but they do take some time to get the hang of. The dpad change is the big change here though. This is a much better and more improved dpad and a lot more precise. This is just a huge upgrade completely. And if you're somebody who's going to play a lot of retro games or fighting games on this, it's a clear winner. I really like this D-pad. It is accurate, it's solid feeling, and it does exactly what you want a D-pad to do, which is just be a D-pad. The triggers have changed as well. They're now slightly angled, and the contours have changed as well as being bigger, but they feel great in the hands. Like the rest of the changes that ASUS have made to the outside, it's all in service of better ergonomics, and I really can feel that here. Another noticeable difference is the macro buttons on the back of the device. I guess a complaint that a lot of people had was accidentally pressing those buttons on the back of the original Ally, but that's not something that I ever had an issue with. Now, they're a lot smaller and more compact, and definitely a decent change. Personally, I haven't noticed a difference at all with this compared to the previous, but it wasn't something that affected me either way. Now, one area that ASUS improved upon that didn't really need improving was the speakers. They actually made some changes to the speakers here, and they sound louder and richer compared to the original Ally. And this wasn't a scenario where the original Ally's speakers were bad. They were actually fantastic. So they're just better now, and that's great. Okay, so let's talk about software differences here. With the Ally X comes the launch of a new ArmouryCrate SE update. First up, you can have an actual TDP slider in the command center for manual mode, which makes it much easier than heading into ArmouryCrate. They've also added an end task button and a few other new buttons to it. Honestly, I've been using end task a lot just to exit some games. It's not a forceful end task, and it's more in line with like an Alt F4. They've also added 900p as a resolution option, since many found that they like that instead, and I actually do use this for a few games. There's joystick and gyroscope calibration and sensitivity adjustments now for the sticks as well. A really nice addition for those of you that like to play at night is you can lower the brightness down further. It used to be 25 nits on the original Ally, and now it is 10 nits, like you can see on screen. Performance-wise, the default RAM allocation is now 12 plus 4 gigabytes, but you can manually allocate anywhere from 1 to 8 gigabytes of VRAM for more performance if needed. But I think my favorite change is they've made it so that all of your updates are in one spot. Before, we needed to go to My ASUS for some things, then ArmouryCrate for others, but now all of that is in ArmouryCrate, cutting down on the hassle for updates, which to me is great. There's a few changes to the actual front-end piece as well. It's a new design and new layouts with favorites and all of that sort of thing, as you'd expect a front-end to have. But the new awesome parts that the community will like is you can share your game profile or use a game profile that's created by the community. This should hopefully cut down on a lot of people having to figure out what's the best way to play a game. There's also the addition of AMD Fluid Motion Frames toggles, and you can uninstall games right from the front end. Overall, I'm actually extremely impressed by how much they've done here. Typically, I use Steam Big Picture or Play Night as my front end of choice, and I launch all of my games through there. But for a lot of people that want a no extra, no hassle approach, this works really well. And since you already have to use ArmouryCrate for adjusting per game settings, you might as well just launch everything from here. Okay, so let's start to wrap up here, and we'll have a segment dedicated to who this might be for. The easy thing is to go to bestbuy.com and you see that the original Ally is $650 US. The Ally X is $800 US. $150 US difference, and yeah, it's easy to say that is worth the price of admission for just $150 to go to the X. But that doesn't really tell the story, does it? The Ally has open box units, marketplace units, there's been sales, all of that sort of thing, and it has gone down in price quite a bit throughout the time that it's been out. For anybody that's a price-conscious shopper, you could get it as low as $450 US or even cheaper. That is a price difference of $350 to the Ally X now. And so this is where this segment comes into play, because I can't really say, as much as I really love the Ally X, that it is a one-size-fits-all device. I can't recommend it to every single person, especially at the price difference that these two are at. So it's kind of have to be a specific use case that you're going to want this over this. I think for those of you that have the Ally, had the Ally, and maybe had issues with battery and comfort, and those were the main issues why you gave it up, then yeah, this completely makes sense. This solves those problems and solves a whole bunch more, and it is a perfect, complete, total upgrade over that. I think if you have the Steam Deck or Steam Deck OLED right now, and it isn't your perfect device, maybe you've been wanting more power, maybe you don't like 800p, maybe you want VRR, maybe you haven't jumped to another device because nothing has matched it on comfort and battery. It's here now. Ally X is here now, so you can jump to it, but you're going to pay for it. Either way, I think no matter which way you look at it, the barrier to entry on the X is going to be the price. That's just the one negative here. It has everything else that you want, but the price, it's more expensive than the other options. And so it's going to be up to you on if battery and comfort and the performance that this offers and all of that in one package is worth spending the money for. I know what my answer is, but I can't speak to everybody. So it's all going to be on your scenario. Maybe you wait a little bit and get some open box units, or maybe you wait for the Ally 2 and hope that it's better, because it's not always a scenario that a sequel to a device is going to be better. I'm looking at you, Ambernick, again. But I will say that on my end, this is the handheld to beat now. There is no question in my mind. Every other handheld that comes out after this is going to have to compare against this, because this is now the complete total package for me. There is performance, there's battery, there's comfort. It's everything. It's everything all in one package. And this is exactly what I have been waiting for. And I'm super happy that they made this revision. But I'm going to have to put the segment in, because probably even before I got here, there was a comment already about ASUS's warranty concerns. And so, yeah, I mean, 100%. If you have been living under a rock and maybe you haven't followed Gamers Nexus's videos on ASUS's warranty practices, then maybe you should go check it out. But it's a big concern for a lot of people. ASUS is just not doing well on the warranty and RMA processes, and it's a big problem. Personally, I've been dealing with Dell on my Dell OLED monitor. They have been refusing to RMA it for months now. So I am no stranger in the last 30 years of me living, dealing with companies on warranty and concerns, and I've had good experiences and I've had really bad experiences. And that isn't to take away from anything ASUS is doing, but it just means that we all have our own risk tolerances, and if what ASUS is doing on the warranty front bothers you, then no matter what I say, you're not going to buy this anyways. So this segment is just do your research and see if that bothers you enough to not buy this and make your decision from there. On my front, I have been waiting for a Windows handheld like this to go toe-to-toe with the Steam Deck OLED for battery life, as well as Android devices for battery life. And this is that. Performance, battery, comfort, all of it in one. And so for me, this is an easy decision. Even if ASUS didn't send this device for review, I had one for pre-order. I was gonna buy this no matter what, because it solves all of my problems for Windows handheld gaming. It is exactly what I've been looking for, and I'm guessing what a lot of people have been looking for too. But with most things that are the best, they're not always the cheapest, and so price is going to be the barrier to entry here. Okay, now just leave me alone. I want to play with this thing. I have been counting down the days till this review is done, so I can go and play this in my natural habitat and not have to worry about benchmarks or anything like that. I'm excited to just sit down and play with this, and hopefully when you guys get yours too, you'll have that same excitement. That's going to be it for this one. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk about this handheld and other handhelds. Support me on Patreon if you like my stuff. And hope you all have a good one.